Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of Darshan Talks. Today's talk is going to be really interesting because it's about a current topic that everyone's been talking about, which is Mark Cuban's pharmacy. And it's supposed to be this huge deal. And I'm excited, quite honestly. If it delivers on what it promises, I'm really excited because I think patients need cheap alternatives, cheap drugs. And I'm very excited about the possibility of enabling that. However, the truth is that I know absolutely nothing about drug reimbursement. It's very difficult for me to fully understand and learn how to separate the wheat from the chaff. So I decided to reach out to a friend of mine who is on here right now. He is the National Managed Care Practice Leader and COE Director for Willis Towers Watson. Formerly known as Willis Towers Watson, now known as WTW. You can find him via his email at kenneth.white@wtwco.com, which is a new email address, by the way. Or you can actually find him on LinkedIn at Kenneth White. Our guest for today, Kenneth White. Hey, Kenny.
Good afternoon. How are you doing?
We're doing well. I'm doing great. I'm not sure why I used we, because that would be like the royal we, if
Yeah.
you will.
Well, you are the royal we.
I do take a royal we, but
I'm not going there.
exactly. That was too easy. I could have done
It
better.
was a slow, easy one across the plate. I am not swinging at that.
uh, let's start from the beginning. What
Sure.
is Mark Cuban promising? Why is it such a big deal, assuming it delivered on everything it says it wants to deliver on?
Well, I mean, the first thing is Mark Cuban seems to be promoting Mark Cuban, which is not a bad thing. I mean, you create a public benefit company and then you name it Mark Cuban Cost Plus Drug Company, as opposed to just Cost Plus Drug Company, or think of a name, you put your own name on it. You know, that's Cuban. His you If you've watched Shark Tank much, or you follow the Dallas Mavericks or any of the other things that Cuban has been involved in, he's an entrepreneurial guy. He probably has an ego the size of Texas, and that's not a bad thing. A lot of entrepreneurial people do. Um, the concept behind what he's doing is not novel. It's called sourcing a product from manufacturers of the product and then selling that product to end users.
So,
So he claims that he wants to get rid of the middleman, but in fact, he is a middleman. You're not buying furniture directly from the warehouse, you're buying it from a furniture distributor. So, same thing with drugs.
but then isn't he right in that if you get rid of at least some tiers of middlemen, because what pharma is rife with is way too many middlemen, whether we're talking about healthcare provider, sorry,
Hold on a second. Pharma is rife with complicated pricing and reimbursement.
okay.
The fact that there are people in the middle, you know, sausage is not an attractive thing to watch being made,
Mhm.
but if you like sausage, it's really good. Um, so in this case, the concept isn't so much how you get from point A to point B, it's what point B is in terms of a price. So if you look at the theory, and it's not the theory, it's the way he does things. And it's simple. Simplicity is a wonderful thing in today's healthcare. So they source generic drugs. Um,
Mhm.
they claim that they have access to up to 800 of them now.
Mhm.
They ramped up very quickly. I mean, they
Mhm.
didn't go live until earlier this year. So they've ramped up very quickly. They source generics only.
Mhm.
Um, of the thousands and thousands of them that are out there, they have access to 800. They warehouse them. They acquire them from the manufacturer. They warehouse them, and then they increase the price by 15%, a 15% markup. They charge a 3% handling fee and a $5 mailing fee. Um, and then that's what it is. So if the drug costs $10,
Mhm.
then you get add $1.50 to it for the 15% markup. You add $3 for handling, which makes it $14.50, and then you add $5, which makes it $19.50. So, for a $10 drug, you're now paying $19.50. you know, that that's sort of like, it's free, but wait, you can get, if you order now, you can get two for the price of one if you'll just pay the, shipping and handling costs. Um, you realize, of course, that the MLR, the medical loss ratio allowed for managed care plans under the ACA is 15%. So they have to include all administrative expenses out of a premium dollar within that 15%. If they don't, then you run into problems. So that includes their profit margin, all expenses, all administrative expenses, et cetera, within that 15%. So Mark is taking the 15% and then adding another $8 to it, which, if it gets drugs into the hands, first of all, they don't take insurance.
Hmm.
So it's solely self-pay. So it's sort of like a online version of GoodRx.
Hmm.
GoodRx is a point of sale discount.
Hmm.
So we discussed those last time you and I talked, the
Yep.
patient assistance programs. So if you go to CVS or Walgreens or whatever and you get your medication and you use one of the patient assistant programs, you can get the drug at a significant discount over what the standard retail price of the drug would be.
Right.
So in this case, basically that's what Cuban is doing. He's just doing it through a mail order process as opposed to anything else. But I'm Merck
Right.
or Pfizer.
Sure.
I'm selling medications.
Right.
So, well, let's pick another one. Let's name a big
Teva.
generic.
Teva.
So Teva. So I got, I'm selling generics. I mean, my goal is to sell the medication, right? I'm
Right.
manufacturing something. It's costing me something. I have to employ people. I have to have a hard cost and a place and regulatory costs and liability costs and everything else that goes into it. I have to sell my product at a certain price in order to break even and make a profit.
Right.
Okay. I can't sell that drug to Mark Cuban any cheaper on a bottom line price than I can sell it to Express Scripts or OptumRx, because OptumRx is sourcing medications for 45 million people.
Right. The
Mark Cuban is selling to a million, maybe.
right.
So if I'm selling the drug, I can't sell it to Mark Cuban cheaper. So what happens between the sales price on this end and the end price? If I go with my insurance
Hmm.
and let's pick a drug. I don't, everybody knows my health history. Irbesartan,
Sure.
generic hypertension drug.
Yeah.
So on my insurance, even before I hit my deductible, it's dirt cheap.
Right.
I mean, I get 90 days for $25.
Right.
And once I hit my deductible, it's basically free.
Right.
So to me, if I didn't use my insurance and I bought that medication from Mark Cuban, it's probably going to be more expensive buying it from Mark Cuban because Aetna
Hmm.
or Cigna or Humana or any of the Blues or United, they have, or they're using a PBM. It's, Caremark, it's Ingenio, it's Prime Therapeutics, it's McKesson, it's OptumRx, it's ESI.
Hmm.
They have contracted prices for those drugs. Now, how that price gets down to what I pay,
Hmm.
that's the complicated part that everybody gets confused about,
Right.
which is, okay, I'm going to charge $10,
Hmm.
but based on volume, I'm going to give discounts and or rebates down to $7. And then when it's dispensed to the member, they have to pay 20% or 30% of the $3. So it depends on whether you're comparing apples to oranges or apples to apples as to whether or not what he's doing is good or not. Now, obviously, he doesn't take insurance. So you're an uninsured person. If the drug is cheaper from Mark Cuban costplusdrugs.com than
Mhm.
it is retail pharmacy or with using a good RX or something like that discount, then hell yeah, it's a great idea.
So I have several questions associated with this. So let's start with the first one, which was from one of the things I learned in conversations with you was actually this was actually from a different client. Actually, I was in this situation where a client said, "I want to give my drug away for say $100, but if I contract with a third party insurance company, which I have to because that's the vast majority of companies out there who will end up paying for this and give me access to patients, they want to be able to demonstrate to their members that they can get a good discount. So I have to give them a massive, I have to give them as high a number as possible so that they can show a massive discount from that. So
Right.
it's that perverse incentive that causes this. So,
But
so
who cares?
well, because I think that's the market, right? That Mark, I say
But
Mark like I know him, but that Cuban's targeting. Go ahead.
Cuban is targeting a market that does not have a white knight other than GoodRx or the other uh, similar programs or things like the patient assistance programs,
Mhm.
because none of what he's doing has anything to do with CMS. CMS is the largest buyer of drugs on the
Right,
planet.
right.
So this does not, it's not Medicare, it's not Medicaid, it's not TRICARE, it's not FEBA, it's not CHIPS, it's not any of that.
Yep.
It also has nothing to do with the Affordable Care Act. It has nothing to do with commercial, um, and it has nothing to do with self-funded health plans.
Right.
It's only the uninsured.
Well,
So,
not quite though. It's
or people who don't want to use their insurance.
exactly. So you
So
pointed
if you
out,
have a high deductible, so let's assume for a moment
yeah,
that you're an ACA member,
yep,
and you've picked a bronze level
correct,
plan. You're 95% government subsidied anyway, and your deductible is 5 grand. Although I think the deductible on some of those plans is $7,500. So I
correct,
mean, $7,500. So unless you're an inpatient, you're trying to negotiate the costs of your health care outside of insurance anyway, because you're not getting any benefit out of it because of the deductible. So in that case, you can choose not to use your insurance,
yeah.
um, and just go straight to Cuban's deal and get your drugs. And again, if it's cheaper doing it that way, it's like going to Walmart. I mean, I don't know what Walmart charges. I didn't, I didn't look up their price deal. I did look up a few.
Right, right,
And in fact, I looked up on Cuban's website and on my own personal website for my carrier,
right.
and the cost is actually cheaper for me on mine than it is on Cuban's.
Sure.
But that's because I have good insurance. And if you don't, or you have a very high deductible, this may be a great idea. And from if he can ramp it up to where he's got economies of scale,
Right,
then hey, there's nothing wrong with doing it. It's I shop at Walmart. There's nothing
right,
wrong with Walmart.
right,
I mean, and if you could get something that's a generic drug from a warehouse in Dallas
right.
or outside of Dallas, and they'll ship it to you, and it's cheaper than getting it anywhere else, then why not?
So
I
what
mean,
we're
I
saying
had
is,
a pet who required a whole lot of. I used a company down here called Alavet, and that's
okay,
basically exactly what it is for pet medications. It's just a warehouse where they store them. And if I bought the same medications, at my, veterinarian, it was 4 times more expensive than if they ordered them online. Same drug,
So,
you know.
first of all, we have a comment from Jyoti Ranjan who goes, "Isn't the cheap availability of generic drugs what this is all about, irrespective of the 8% cut, as he stated?" I'm not sure I fully understand the point, but as I understand it, yeah, it is about the cheap availability of generic drugs. The issue, I think, that the flaw, as I see it in the Cuban plan right now, at least, is that it's only about the generic drugs. I think a lot of people are. Go ahead, and feel free to answer Jyoti Ranjan as well. But yeah,
That's both the bane and the beauty. Once you, and in fact, they're building currently a manufacturing plant outside of Dallas where they intend to manufacture generic drugs. Now, that, in my opinion, is a bad idea.
Mhm.
It's a bad idea because you take the simplicity of sourcing medications in bulk, making the process as streamlined and cheap as possible, and flipping those drugs for a stated price markup, handling fee, and mailing charge to something else. Because now you have to have licenses to manufacture the drugs. You run into issues of having FDA approval for the manufacturer of the drugs. You have massive issues with potential patent infringement lawsuits by the manufacturers of the other drugs. You have issues related to labeling. You have issues related to product liability that you didn't otherwise have. You have litigational risk. Um, you have recall issues. You have all sorts of things related to manufacturing something that before you just bought,
Yeah,
which is a sort of a misnomer. I mean, Cuban is a middleman
sure.
until he starts manufacturing these things and then selling them directly. The problem is that he may not be able to manufacture them for less money than he's buying them now. Because if I'm buying from Teva's not just selling to me.
Correct.
I'm Mark Cuban. I'm not just buying drugs. Teva's selling to people who buy a ton more than I will ever buy.
Right. Right.
So I'm making 1 billion pills. Mark's getting 1 million of them. The
Right.
other 999 million are going somewhere else.
Right.
So the economies of scale related to that are huge. But
Right.
if I'm going to make my own 1 million pills, the per pill cost is going to go up.
So I actually agree with you. I think it's. I didn't know he's trying to build his own pharmaceutical company. I think that's a terrible idea on multiple other reasons. You outlined several of them, but I think there are companies that have done it. To be clear, DaVita, Fresenius have done an incredible job with it. It's exposed them to some liability, but they are a
Yeah.
vertically integrated company.
DaVita's in the middle of a massive antitrust lawsuit.
Right. Right. And I think it's one thing to be able, and I think we're going off topic with me talking about my skill set, but I think it's one thing to be in the business of reimbursement. I think it's a totally different beast to get and do it for 500 drugs. It would be next to impossible to have any manufacturing facility manufacture 50, 70, 100 drugs, do that for the tens of thousands of options out there, and you're asking for trouble because the
Yeah.
cost of filing an ANDA and the like is just too prohibitive.
Because right now I'm buying a product.
Yeah,
It could be anything. It could be gloves. It could be
yeah,
widgets. It could be whatever it is. I'm buying it from somebody else that's already got a price. They're selling me the price. I'm negotiating the best price I can get.
yeah,
I'm warehousing it over here. I'm getting prescriptions in. My only real administrative headache, other than sourcing the medications and logistically getting them out again, is managing the prescriptions.
yeah.
I mean, you jump from that to something else, then your administrative costs are going to go through the roof, if nothing else.
I was corporate counsel for a generic pharma company, so I've done this. I've been in that business. Having said that, I understand his thought process. His thought process is as much as we can cut out the middleman, we reduce the actual cost. And I
Yeah,
think
but he
from
is a
a
middleman.
perspective, it's good. Right.
He is a middleman. I mean, he's not, and until he starts making the stuff himself, he is a middleman.
So let's take that next portion of it, right? So if he is the middleman, why is that necessarily a bad idea? Because
It's
if he
not.
still manages to keep the costs low, in the case of
Not a
800,
bad idea for the limited market that he's impacting. It's not a bad idea. His his thing is that he's disrupting and going to turn the entire industry on its head, and he's not. I
so
mean,
the
he's not
issue is the
touching.
small market,
He's touching a million out of 330 million patients. I mean, is he doing a bad thing? No,
right?
he's not. And if you can reduce the cost and provide a product that is necessary and needed to a group of people who don't have a better way of getting it for as little as possible in a transparent way, I applaud you. I think it's a great idea. There's nothing wrong with it at all. I just think that it's not it's not the disruption to the industry that he envisions it being, because unless he is going to get into the insured market, at which time he may discover that the in cost to the member in terms of overall insurance. Because remember something, of the $400 billion in drug spend, that doesn't include, I don't think, the med pay part of that. So inpatient drug spend is actually almost as expensive as all outpatient drug spend put together. Plus 70% of all drug spend is on a very few limited drugs that very few people use.
Right.
So he's impacting a set of generics where large numbers of people use them. They are relatively cheap to start with. They're relatively available across the marketplace, and he's doing a good job. But I mean, there's no infusion drugs in there. There's no biosimilars in there. There's no synthetics in there. There's no hormones in there. There's no cancer drugs in there. There's no branded high-end medications in there. And that's where most of the money goes.
So what I'm hearing you say is that who Mark is really disrupting is your Costco's, your Walmarts, and your GoodRxs of the world, not your Express Scripts, because they're the ones who are playing that cash market, if you will. And he's potential, and he's not even necessarily disrupting it as much as being a competitor for that market.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, and like I said, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean,
right,
it's a good thing. I mean, if I don't have insurance, or I have insurance with a really high deductible where my medication is going to be, as his marketing says, people have to make a decision between the rent and the drugs. I
yeah,
mean, that's a very, very tired statement. Everybody, including most
yeah,
politicians, use it. But if I'm in a situation where I've either got no insurance because I didn't get it,
right,
because it's available, or I'm one of those 90% subsidized people on an ACA program that's got a very big deductible that I can't afford, because why? I couldn't afford my insurance. So why would you think I could afford my deductible? That's sort of a comical thing about the ACA. But I mean, in that situation, so I'm not going to use my insurance. But I need to get the medication, and if I can get it cheaper through Mark Cuban's costplusdrugs.com or any other online pharmacy, um, it's great. I mean, it's transparent according to Mark. I don't know how much it. I hate to say this because I don't know the answer to the question. But I mean, there's a big difference between manufacturer suggested retail price and what an actual car dealer pays. And when they tell you that they're taking their cost and
right.
we're increasing them by X, I don't know what their cost is, That's sort of like the PBM industry, and I don't know whether or not Mark Cuban's cost is, you know, done that way to where everybody could easily see exactly what they paid, for the pills that they are now selling you at 15+% plus the 3 plus the 5. If you can, great, wonderful. If you can't, then, I'm not sure it really matters as long as you can afford the end result. And same thing with insurance. I mean, if somebody wants to tell me that the drug cost $1 million and my cost at the end of the day was $30, then I really don't care about the $1 million. I
So
care about the $30.
so yeah, and that's a fair point. So I guess let me ask you this question. One of the big headlines has been this idea that if Medicare would have used the Mark Cuban plan, they would have saved, I think, something like $300 million. What, could you explain how they came up with that number? If what you're saying is it doesn't quite work out that way.
Well, first of all, if wishes were horses, we would all ride.
Okay.
All right. It's not the same analogy I used a little while ago, but I did want to use that in the public forum. Um, so the concept being, if Mark Cuban's company had been around 3 years ago when the data was collected for the little study that they used for their marketing, which I think was probably effective marketing on their part as opposed to any type of real scientific study, but they have a person, or they are using a person who said that if we went back and we looked at the drug spend for Medicare back in 2019 or 2020, I believe it may have been 2019, um, and if you had used drug pricing from Mark Cuban's drug prices, they would have saved $3.6 billion. Well,
Right.
first of all, it didn't exist in 2019, so it's a useless, thing. Second of all, Medicare, is under stringent legal and regulatory requirements so that they couldn't use Mark Cuban's place, even if it was then in 2019. So again, it doesn't matter. I
Okay.
mean, that's like saying if I bought something for $100, but I bought it for $80, then I'd have saved $20. Well, yeah, you would have. That's great math. I like that. I was never really good at math. I have a calculator, but even I can do that one. So it's inverse reasoning. It doesn't really make much sense. The problem is that it doesn't have a corollary because Medicare can't use Mark Cuban's pricing schedule. They are statutorily and regulatorily prohibited from doing so.
But
So
let's say they could. Does that matter? Like, is it a simple thing of opening up the options, or
I mean,
is there a legal
if today was Tuesday, then today would be Tuesday. But they can't.
Okay.
There are several dueling pieces of legislation in the House and in the Senate at the moment that are again directed at lowering the price of drugs, which
Right.
isn't lowering the price of drugs at all. It's reducing the increases in the price of drugs over time. So it won't make the drugs cheaper, it just makes the increase lower because we've had anywhere from 9 to 35, 36, 37% per year increases in both outpatient and inpatient drug spend in the last 10 years.
Right.
I mean, 10 years ago, by a huge margin on the graph, the biggest chunk of the 4 trillion that we now spend on healthcare was inpatient care, which
Right.
would include inpatient drug spend
Right.
because that's not so
Correct.
if
That's
you're
not separated out. Yeah.
we don't have to explain that hopefully, but I mean, but now the total drug spend is approaching what we pay for inpatient care. So it's going up significantly higher than regular cost across most services, not all, but most. So they're just trying to reduce the increases by allowing Medicare to quote unquote negotiate the prices of drugs because right now they pay for drugs based upon a formulaic methodology that does not include um, actual negotiation. It's like, this is what the cost of the drug is according to the formula, and we pay X using the mathematical formula to get to X.
Right.
I can't, Medicare, CMS can't go to Pfizer and go, okay, I want to buy this drug and I'm going to buy this much of it this year. I don't want to pay any more than this,
Right.
and skip the mathematical formula. They can't do that.
Right.
So unless they change the law or they change the regulations or both, they're stuck. So it's a lovely thing to say that if they had used this, they would have, you know. But remember something, with insurance and with CMS to some degree, the quote unquote law of large numbers is at play.
Right.
The Tonstoffel principle as well. There ain't no such thing as a free lunch. We have to spread the cost of everything across a large pool so that you, who may not ever hopefully need cancer infusion drugs, part of what you pay in taxes for Medicare, Medicaid, et cetera, and part of what you pay in your healthcare premium is going to cover the infusion drug costs of someone else.
Right. Right.
So in insurance and in government financing, you're attempting to spread the cost across a much larger group of people. Whereas if you were sourcing the medications from a third party, from a manufacturer, and then flipping them to other people, as long as you're covering your overhead and whatever profit or retained earnings, because it's a public benefit company, your retained earnings are covered within that amount of money, then you do it okay, because you're not worried about any other type of expense.
So is it fair to say that even if Mark may not, and I say this like he's the only guy doing this, he's sitting in the back filling drugs, but let's say Mark may not have the huge impact he wants because he's not addressing brand drugs, he's not really addressing as massive a population, because it's not really addressing the insured population in as much of the same way as one might think. He is forcing a conversation on something like the ability of Medicare and Medicaid to possibly begin negotiations, which they're not allowed to do, and that might drop the cost from pharma companies.
I I will admit, after years and years of training and years in the legal field and years doing what I'm doing, I still just scratch my head. And as you can see, I've been pulling the hair out over how the government does things. Um, eh, if I'm Medicare and I have to buy all of these drugs from X, then I can go out to Mark Cuban and say, you source all my meds. Or they could do it at ESI, they could do it at OptumRx, they
Right,
could do it at anything and say, look, this is the price I want to pay. I want to pay this amount of money. The
right.
problem when you do it that way is that then these other drugs that are being subsidized by these other drugs are now no longer being subsidized. So so if I'm paying $100,000 for a drug and I can afford to sell you that drug for $100,000 because I'm making money off these other drugs, and now I'm not making money off the other things, so now my drug has to be $110,000, it may come out worse because the drugs that are going to be more adversely impacted are the more expensive ones. That is unfortunately being uh, the market is being hammered a little bit because the drug companies gotten very, very smart at um, playing business structure pyramiding. So I have a holding company and I make a drug that I think has great upside potential, but may have some significant liability with it. I spin that drug off into a separate corporate entity. That separate corporate entity sells only that drug.
Right.
So if it all goes great, fine. The company makes a lot of money. The money funnels up the corporate tree, and we're all happy because we all own shares in Pfizer.
Yeah.
But if it all goes to hell in a handbag, then it's just that company that goes under. The rest of us are still floating fine
Right.
because that company, it has its corporate existence. If it has liability, then unless we can pierce the corporate veil, as they say, from a legal perspective, it's just that company that falls on its face, and the rest of the company is fine and dandy.
Right.
Um, so that makes things more complicated as well. But there's a reason why um, the government doesn't turn around and buy all of its paper pickup product from Walmart.
Sure.
You know,
Paper.
that's because the government goes out and buys it directly from the manufacturer, or it's sourced from some other place, or it's got a huge amount of politics and other stuff built into it, where it comes from and how it gets there, etc. Medication isn't a whole lot different.
We can have now you're in my sweet spot, and I can talk a lot about that. For example, I think a lot of people in the pharma industry wouldn't be happy about some of the stuff I say here. But the fact is that if what you're talking about is, so you might land up for specific generic drugs, you might land up in a scenario where one drug is subsidizing the cost of another drug. Now, suddenly, if you put price caps on one, have you basically disincentivized the production of the other?
Yeah.
The problem with that is if you've disincentivized it, either you make it at that lower cost, so it's not as profitable, but it is still profitable, or and if you do that, which is what, for example, a large portion of the developed world does, they say we'll just take lower prices. The alternative is that you can't make it, and then some other company comes in and says we'll make it for you. If there are patents in play, you start dealing with things like compulsory licensing. You start dealing with alternative sourcing, and in some cases, the FDA has even looked at drug reimportation. So all of which come onto the playing field. It's not a pleasant thought, and you do that enough, maybe there are other repercussions. But pharma in general has ways to address that. None of them are pleasant, but we have reached a point, I think.
Well, I mean, there's a reason. I mean, the drugs that are available here at $10 are in fact sold in other countries for $2.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, why is that? Well, I mean, a lot of it has to do with regulatory headaches and other things that aren't in place in other places that are in place here. And the other part is the way that the system works. It's not being, it's in most other places, it's either being, it's all, cash. It's all a cash basis, sale, or it's being sourced by the government.
On that note, we're well beyond time, so we do need to call it. But Kenny, thank you again for coming on. This was amazing as always. I do want to say that the last video we did with Ken was very, very well received. One of the big reasons he came on is because his last video was one of the most seen videos, and he finally agreed to do one because someone else saw more.
Yeah, I don't get that. Well, how in the hell, that's just not appropriate for someone else to be more watched than me. And I will say I like Shark Tank, but I'm not a Dallas Mavericks fan. But I don't, anybody that can come into a marketplace and manage to sell a product cheaper than someone else deserves to be looked at. It's just not going to be the kind of earth-changing, status-changing matter. It won't move the needle. It'll move the needle for individuals.
Correct.
Which is a good thing.
But not at a
it will not move the needle for the country,
But maybe it forces the conversations, and that's pretty good.
Yeah, well, a lot of those conversations have to take place in that domed building in DC.
Yes. Kenny, thank you again. This was amazing. And if you have questions, please reach out to me, reach out to Kenny. We'd love to talk. If you could share, leave a comment, we would appreciate it. Thank you again.